In the early 1990s, Hollywood was filled with big action movies. Explosions, car chases, and tough heroes seemed to dominate every theater screen. Audiences loved films like Die Hard and Terminator 2. These movies had strong men saving the day while everything around them blew up. But by 1994, people were ready for something fresh. That something turned out to be Speed. On paper, the movie looked simple. A bus is rigged with a bomb, and if the bus slows below 50 miles per hour, it explodes. The idea was both terrifying and brilliant. It created natural tension that didn't need too many special effects, just a bus, a city, and a race against time. Director Jan de Bont, who had worked as a cinematographer on films like Die Hard, saw potential in the script. For his first film as a director, he wanted something bold and high energy. Speed was risky, but it had all the ingredients to surprise people. At first, many in Hollywood doubted the project. Some thought it was too simple to carry an entire movie. Others said audiences wouldn't believe a story that takes place mostly on a bus. But what those critics didn't realize was that the strength of Speed wouldn't come only from the action. It would come from the people inside that bus, especially the two at its center, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Casting was everything. For Jack Traven, the cop who jumps onto the bus to save lives, the studio wanted a traditional action star. Names like Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, and even Arnold Schwarzenegger were floated. But Jan de Bont didn't want a flashy hero. He wanted someone who felt real, grounded, and believable. Keanu Reeves, who was known for being thoughtful and quietly intense, was his choice. For Annie Porter, the everyday passenger who suddenly becomes the bus driver, the role needed charm and relatability. The audience had to root for her, laugh with her, and feel her fear. Sandra Bullock, at that time still a rising actress, wasn't the obvious pick. But during auditions, she stood out. She was funny, natural, and had an instant spark with Keanu. When Keanu and Sandra read lines together for the first time, something magical happened. Their timing was perfect, their banter felt real, and their body language connected in a way that didn't feel forced. Jan de Bont later said he knew right then that he had found the heart of his movie. Production began, and though the concept was simple, filming was anything but easy. Shooting action scenes inside a real bus was uncomfortable, hot, and exhausting. But even in these tough conditions, Keanu and Sandra's energy shone through. They didn't just act like characters in danger. They acted like real people connecting with each other, building trust in the middle of chaos. By the time filming wrapped, it was clear Speed wasn't going to be just another action flick. It was a movie with heart, carried by two rising stars whose chemistry was so strong, audiences would still be talking about it decades later. What began as a risky project about a bus with a bomb ended up becoming one of the most iconic films of the 1990s, and the spark that made Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock legends. Before he became the action hero of Speed, Keanu Reeves was already a familiar face in Hollywood, though not yet the global superstar we know today. His journey was unique, and in many ways, it shaped how audiences connected to him as Jack Traven. Keanu Charles Reeves was born in Beirut, Lebanon, in 1964, but he grew up in Canada. His childhood wasn't easy. His father left when he was very young, and his family moved several times before finally settling in Toronto. This early life gave Keanu a sense of independence and humility that stayed with him into adulthood. People often say he has a calm, gentle presence, and this comes from his personal experiences. He knew hardship, and that gave him a quiet strength that audiences could sense in his performances. In the late 1980s, Keanu started landing roles that brought him attention. His breakout was in the comedy Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, 1989. In that film, he played Ted, a goofy, lovable teenager traveling through time. The movie was a huge success and gave Keanu instant recognition. But it also came with a problem. Many people assumed he was only capable of playing silly characters. Some critics even joked that Keanu was just a surfer dude type of actor. Keanu wanted to prove them wrong. He began choosing roles that were more serious. In 1991, he starred in Point Break as an FBI agent opposite Patrick Swayze. This movie was important because it showed Keanu could handle action. He trained in surfing, skydiving, and FBI-style tactics, and his performance impressed many. He also took on dramas like My Own Private Idaho, 1991, where he starred alongside River Phoenix. That role showed his emotional depth and gave him more respect in Hollywood circles. Still, when it came to leading an action movie like Speed, some people were unsure. Studios often preferred actors with a tough guy image, like Bruce Willis or Sylvester Stallone. Keanu was different. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and had a quiet charm. He didn't shout or act overly macho. But this difference was exactly what made him perfect for Jack Traven. Director Jan de Bont wanted a hero who felt like a real person, not a superhero. Jack wasn't supposed to be flashy. He was supposed to be steady, calm under pressure, and believable. Keanu's personality matched that vision perfectly. He wasn't just acting. He was naturally bringing those qualities to the role. What also helped Keanu stand out was his dedication. For Speed, he cut his trademark long hair short, giving himself a sharper, more professional look. At the time, many fans were shocked, but it made him look more like a real cop. He also trained with the Los Angeles Police Department's SWAT team, learning how to move, hold weapons, and think like an officer. He wanted to bring authenticity to his role, and that hard work showed on screen. Keanu's approach to acting was different from many others in Hollywood. He didn't chase fame, and he wasn't interested in showing off. Instead, he focused on being honest in his performances. That honesty was exactly what made audiences believe in him as Jack Traven. When he jumped onto that bus, when he reassured passengers, when he risked his life to save others, people believed it because it felt real. By the time Speed came out, Keanu was no longer just the Bill and Ted guy. He had proven himself as a leading man, someone who could carry an action movie while also showing kindness and humanity. His role in Speed would open the door to even bigger opportunities like The Matrix and would forever change how Hollywood and the world saw Keanu Reeves. Before Speed made Sandra Bullock a household name, she was just another hard-working actress trying to find her place in Hollywood. Her rise to stardom didn't happen overnight. It was a journey filled with small roles, persistence, and a personality that set her apart from so many others in the industry. Sandra Annette Bullock was born in Arlington, Virginia, in 1964. Her childhood was far from ordinary. Her mother was a German opera singer, and her father was a voice coach. Because of her mother's career, Sandra spent much of her early life in Europe, especially in Germany and Austria. She learned to speak German fluently and grew up surrounded by art, music, and performance. From an early age, she was comfortable on stage, often appearing in her mother's productions. This gave her confidence but also taught her discipline, lessons she carried with her into acting. When Sandra returned to the United States, she pursued acting seriously. She studied drama at East Carolina University, but left before finishing her degree, moving to New York City to chase her dreams. Like many struggling actors, she worked odd jobs while auditioning for roles. She performed in off-Broadway plays and took small parts in TV shows. These were humble beginnings, but each role gave her experience and built her resilience. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Sandra started to get noticed in Hollywood. She appeared in films like Love Potion No. 9 and had supporting roles in movies such as Demolition Man, 1993, where she acted alongside Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes. While she did well, these roles didn't make her a star. In fact, some critics dismissed her as just another actress trying to fill love interest parts. But Sandra had something many others lacked: a natural charm that connected with audiences. Unlike other Hollywood actresses who seemed distant or glamorous, Sandra came across as relatable. She had a down-to-earth quality that made people feel like she could be their friend, neighbor, or even classmate. She was funny, approachable, and unafraid to laugh at herself. This authenticity was rare in Hollywood, and it's one of the reasons she stood out even before Speed. When the role of Annie Porter came along, it was originally written for a different type of character. Annie wasn't supposed to be as funny or warm. She was just an ordinary passenger. But Sandra saw an opportunity. She auditioned for the part and brought her own personality into it. She wasn't just reading lines, she was giving Annie life. She turned her into someone audiences could root for, someone brave but also full of humor. At first, the studio didn't see Sandra as the obvious choice. They considered more established actresses. But when Sandra read lines with Keanu Reeves during auditions, everything changed. The connection between them was instant. They bounced off each other naturally, their timing perfect. Sandra's playful energy balanced Keanu's calm intensity, and the result was electric. Director Jan de Bont knew he had found his Annie. What made Sandra perfect for the role wasn't just her acting, it was her spirit. Annie Porter wasn't supposed to be a superhero. She was an everyday woman thrown into an extraordinary situation. Sandra made her relatable, showing fear, humor, and courage all at once. She became the heart of the film, the character audiences could imagine themselves being. When filming began, Sandra proved that she wasn't afraid of hard work. Many of her scenes required her to actually drive the massive bus, something she trained for before production. She wanted everything to look real. Her dedication impressed the crew and her co-star Keanu Reeves. Looking back, it's clear that Speed was the turning point in Sandra Bullock's career. Before it, she was a rising actress trying to prove herself. After it, she became America's sweetheart. Critics praised her performance as the perfect balance of humor and bravery, and audiences fell in love with her. She wasn't just the girl on the bus. She was the woman who stole the show. In many ways, Sandra's own journey mirrored Annie's story. Both were ordinary women facing extraordinary challenges. And both rose to the occasion with strength, humor, and heart. That authenticity is what made Sandra unforgettable in Speed, and it's what launched her into Hollywood legend. Casting is one of the most important parts of making a movie. The story may be strong, the action exciting, and the script well written, but without the right actors, everything can fall flat. For Speed, the casting process was not smooth or easy. In fact, it went through several stages of doubt, changes, and risks before finally landing on the perfect pair, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. When the script for Speed was first circulating in Hollywood, the studio wanted a bankable star for the lead role of Jack Traven. Action films in the early 1990s were dominated by big names. Actors like Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Tom Cruise. These were the faces audiences expected when they thought of action heroes. The studio considered many of them, but most were either unavailable or uninterested. Some even thought the bus story sounded too simple for their careers. Director Jan de Bont, however, had a different vision. He didn't want a flashy, muscle-bound hero. He wanted someone who looked like a real police officer, grounded, believable, and trustworthy. That's when Keanu Reeves came into the picture. At first, executives hesitated. Keanu was known for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, a goofy comedy, and while he had done action in Point Break, he didn't yet have the reputation of a leading man who could carry a blockbuster. Still, Jan de Bont trusted his instincts. He believed Keanu's quiet intensity and natural kindness would make him the perfect Jack Traven. Once Keanu was on board, attention turned to Annie Porter, the role that would define the movie's heart. In the original script, Annie wasn't even the main character. She was just one of the passengers who ended up behind the wheel. The role wasn't written with much humor or charm. But Jan de Bont knew the right actress could turn Annie into something unforgettable. Several actresses were considered for the role. Names like Halle Berry, Ellen DeGeneres, and even Julia Roberts came up. Some turned it down because they thought the part was too small or not exciting enough. Julia Roberts, for example, was already a huge star and didn't feel Annie was a strong enough character for her career at the time. Then came Sandra Bullock. At the time, Sandra wasn't a big name. She had done supporting roles in smaller movies, but nothing that had made her a star. When she auditioned, however, she brought something special to the character. She gave Annie humor, warmth, and bravery. She wasn't just reading lines, she was breathing life into them. The most important moment came when Sandra read lines with Keanu Reeves. The room lit up. Their chemistry was instant. It wasn't forced or fake, it was natural. Sandra's lively energy balanced perfectly with Keanu's calm seriousness. They teased each other, laughed, and reacted to each other in a way that made their partnership believable. Director Jan de Bont later said that this moment convinced him he had found his Annie. One of the key decisions was to rewrite parts of the script to match Sandra's strengths. Originally, Annie was more passive, just reacting to the events. But once Sandra was cast, the character was adjusted to highlight her humor, quick thinking, and charm. This turned Annie from a side character into a true co-lead, and ultimately, the heart of the film. The final step was convincing the studio. Executives were still nervous about casting two relatively unproven stars as the leads in a $30 million action film. But Jan de Bont fought for them. He argued that the movie's success would depend on the audience believing in Jack and Annie, not on seeing another over-the-top hero. In the end, he won. Looking back, the decision to cast Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock was a gamble that paid off beyond anyone's expectations. Not only did they make the film a box office hit, but their chemistry became legendary. Their pairing showed that sometimes the best casting choices aren't the obvious ones. They're the ones that feel real, honest, and true. The casting of Speed is now remembered as one of the smartest decisions in 1990s Hollywood. It proved that stars could be made overnight with the right roles, the right script, and the right connection. Keanu and Sandra didn't just play Jack and Annie, they became them. And in doing so, they created a movie duo that audiences still talk about decades later. When Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock were finally cast in Speed, the next big step was bringing them together on set. Sometimes actors have great auditions, but when the cameras roll, the magic disappears. Other times, the opposite happens, something new and even more powerful develops. With Keanu and Sandra, it was clear from the very beginning that their connection wasn't just a trick of casting. It was real, natural, and unforgettable. Their first official meeting happened during rehearsals. Director Jan de Bont wanted his cast to feel comfortable with each other before jumping into filming, especially since much of the story would take place in tight spaces on the bus. Keanu arrived calm and polite, his usual quiet self. Sandra came in with her bubbly energy, cracking jokes and making people laugh. Immediately, their personalities clicked. Sandra's playfulness brought out Keanu's softer side, and Keanu's calm presence helped Sandra relax. From the start, Sandra admitted she was a little nervous. She wasn't yet a major star and worried about holding her own in such a high-stakes movie. But Keanu never treated her like a newcomer. He gave her respect, listened to her ideas, and made her feel equal. He even encouraged her to try things her own way during rehearsals, which boosted her confidence. During those first few days, the cast spent time practicing scenes and running through dialogue. Keanu and Sandra quickly found a rhythm. Their lines bounced back and forth naturally, and they weren't afraid to improvise small moments. For example, when Sandra teased Keanu in rehearsal, he gave a quiet smile that made everyone laugh. These small, unscripted touches added to the realism of their relationship as Jack and Annie. When filming began, their connection only grew stronger. Shooting inside the bus was difficult. It was cramped, hot, and filled with equipment. The cast and crew had to squeeze together in uncomfortable positions for hours at a time. Instead of getting frustrated, Sandra turned it into fun, making jokes to lighten the mood. Keanu often played along, surprising people with his dry humor. Their shared laughter made the tough conditions easier for everyone. One of the first major scenes they filmed together was when Annie realizes she has to drive the bus. Sandra wanted the moment to feel genuine, a mix of panic, humor, and courage. Keanu supported her by reacting calmly, giving her the space to shine while still holding his character's steady presence. The result was a scene that felt both tense and funny, showing exactly why audiences would fall in love with them as a team. Crew members noticed their connection too. Many later said that Keanu and Sandra didn't just act like co-stars. They acted like friends who had known each other for years. Between takes, they would sit together, share snacks, and chat about ordinary things. This natural comfort translated into their on-screen chemistry. When Jack looked at Annie with trust, or when Annie laughed nervously at Jack's serious advice, it didn't feel like acting. It felt like two real people caught in a dangerous situation, relying on each other to survive. Sandra once recalled that Keanu's presence made her feel safe on set. Whether it was a stunt scene or just a long day of shooting, she trusted him completely. Keanu, in turn, admired Sandra's energy and bravery. He noticed how she threw herself into the role, even when it meant learning to drive a massive bus or staying in uncomfortable positions for hours. He respected her dedication and often encouraged her behind the scenes. Their first weeks on set the tone for the entire production. Instead of tension or ego, there was warmth, trust, and playfulness. This atmosphere not only made the filming smoother, but also gave the movie its heart. The audience would later feel the same thing that the crew felt watching them. Jack and Annie weren't just characters. They were two people brought to life by actors who truly connected. Looking back, that first meeting on set was the spark that lit the fire. Keanu and Sandra may not have realized it at the time, but the friendship and chemistry they built in those early days would become the soul of Speed. Without it, the movie might have been just another action flick. With it, it became a classic, and the beginning of one of Hollywood's most beloved on-screen partnerships. Chemistry in movies is one of the hardest things to explain. It isn't something you can write into a script or force through direction. Two actors can be talented on their own, but when placed together, nothing special happens. Then there are rare times when magic occurs, when two people connect so naturally that their relationship feels completely real to audiences. That's what happened with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock in Speed. From the moment filming began, it was clear their connection wasn't just about saying lines. It was about how they looked at each other, how they listened, and how they responded in ways that felt spontaneous. For Jack and Annie to work as characters, audiences had to believe they could trust each other with their lives. And thanks to Keanu and Sandra, that trust leapt off the screen. Keanu played Jack as calm, serious, and focused, the type of cop who doesn't waste words but earns respect with his actions. Sandra's Annie, on the other hand, was lively, funny, and often nervous but brave when it mattered most. Together, they were like two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly. Jack's strength balanced Annie's vulnerability, while Annie's humor lightened Jack's intensity. This mix gave the film a heart that many other action movies of the time lacked. One famous example of their chemistry came during quieter scenes on the bus. In between moments of panic, Keanu and Sandra exchanged small smiles or quick jokes. These moments weren't just filler. They showed the bond forming between their characters. When Annie teased Jack about being too serious, Keanu's subtle grin said more than a page of dialogue could. Audiences believed these two people were connecting under pressure, not just because the script told them to, but because the actors made it feel real. Sandra herself later joked that part of their chemistry came from the way their characters were written. "I talk a lot in the movie because he doesn't," she laughed in an interview. This balance between chatter and silence worked perfectly. Annie filled the silence with nervous humor, while Jack stayed steady, making her feel safe. The contrast made their relationship dynamic and engaging. But their chemistry wasn't just about contrasts. It was also about mutual respect. Keanu never tried to overshadow Sandra, even though he was technically the action hero. He gave her space to shine, whether it was a comedic line or a brave driving scene. Sandra, in turn, played off Keanu's seriousness by adding warmth and emotion. Instead of competing, they complemented each other. Director Jan de Bont noticed this early on and adjusted how he filmed their scenes. He often placed the camera to capture both their faces at once, showing their reactions to each other. He knew that the spark between Keanu and Sandra was just as important as the speeding bus or the explosions. Their relationship was the engine driving the story forward. Their off-screen connection also played a big role. Between takes, Keanu and Sandra joked around, shared food, and kept the mood light. That friendship carried into their performances. When Sandra looked at Keanu with admiration on screen, it wasn't just acting. It was a reflection of the genuine respect she felt for him. When Keanu gave Sandra one of his quiet smiles, it was partly Jack smiling at Annie and partly Keanu smiling at Sandra. Audiences could sense this authenticity. When the movie premiered, critics and fans alike pointed out how believable Jack and Annie's relationship was. It wasn't the typical action hero saves the girl story. Instead, it felt like two equals supporting each other through danger. This was largely thanks to the way Keanu and Sandra built their chemistry, with honesty, subtlety, and trust. The truth is, their chemistry might have also been fueled by their real-life feelings. Years later, both admitted they secretly had crushes on each other during filming, though neither confessed at the time. Perhaps this unspoken attraction added an extra layer of spark to their scenes. When their eyes lingered a little longer, or when their smiles seemed extra warm, it was because there was something real underneath. Whatever the reason, Keanu and Sandra's on-screen chemistry became the heart of Speed. It transformed the movie from a simple action thriller into a story about connection, trust, and even the possibility of love in the middle of chaos. Without their bond, Speed might have been just another bomb-on-a-bus film. With it, the movie became unforgettable, and their pairing became one of the most iconic in Hollywood history. Filming Speed was no easy task. Most of the movie took place on a moving bus, which created challenges not only for the actors but also for the crew. Imagine trying to fit cameras, lights, microphones, and more than a dozen people into one small space, and then making it all look natural on screen. That was the daily reality for Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, and everyone involved. The bus scenes were filmed both on real city streets and on special tracks built for the movie. Shooting in Los Angeles meant dealing with heavy traffic, long hours, and hot weather. Inside the bus, the air would get stuffy, and the cramped conditions made it difficult to move. Yet despite these challenges, the cast and crew found ways to stay positive. Much of that positive energy came from Keanu and Sandra, whose personalities made the atmosphere lighter and friendlier. Sandra was often the source of laughter. She had a habit of cracking jokes between takes, teasing crew members or making funny faces to break the tension. Her energy was contagious, and people quickly realized that she was the kind of person who could keep spirits high, even during tough days. Keanu, while quieter, added to this in his own way. He wasn't loud or silly, but he had a dry sense of humor. A simple remark or a subtle grin from him could make the whole bus laugh. Together, they balanced each other out, just as their characters did on screen. One of the most impressive things about Sandra was her commitment to realism. She didn't want Annie Porter to look like a movie heroine who somehow knew everything. Instead, she wanted her to feel like a real woman suddenly forced into danger. To prepare, Sandra actually trained to drive the massive bus. She spent time learning how to handle its size and weight, so her performance behind the wheel would be believable. She later joked that she could probably get a real bus driver's license after all the practice she had. Keanu showed the same dedication. Before filming began, he trained with the Los Angeles Police Department's SWAT team. He practiced handling weapons, learning tactical movements, and understanding how real officers think under pressure. This training gave his performance a grounded, authentic quality. When he held a gun or gave an order in the film, it looked natural because he had studied it carefully. Crew members admired his seriousness, noting that he was always focused on making his role as real as possible. Despite their professionalism, Keanu and Sandra's natural friendship often shone through. There are many stories of them sharing snacks on set, making each other laugh, and even helping each other with stunts. Sandra admitted years later that she had a crush on Keanu during filming. She said she found him thoughtful, kind, and incredibly attractive, but she never told him because she didn't want to risk ruining their working relationship. Keanu, as it turned out, had a crush on her too, but he also kept quiet for the same reason. This secret admiration may have fueled the spark audiences noticed on screen. Crew members also remembered Keanu's kindness. He was known for helping carry heavy equipment, holding doors, or offering assistance to crew members even though it wasn't required of him. This humility earned him respect from everyone on set. Sandra later said she had never met someone so generous in spirit, and that working with him was one of the best experiences of her career. Even though filming was exhausting, with long hours and difficult conditions, the team managed to have fun. Sometimes the director would call cut, but Keanu and Sandra would keep joking around, staying in character just to make the crew laugh. These little moments kept everyone motivated and made the production feel less like a job and more like a shared adventure. By the time filming wrapped, it was clear that the laughter, trust, and dedication behind the scenes had shaped the movie itself. The bus scenes felt real not only because of the stunts and effects, but because the actors genuinely enjoyed working together. That joy came through in their performances, turning what could have been just another action movie into something far more memorable. In the end, Speed wasn't only about the thrill of the plot. It was also about the chemistry and teamwork that happened behind the camera. The laughter shared, the crushes kept secret, and the long hours of hard work all combined to create a film that still feels alive today. Without those behind-the-scenes bonds, Speed might not have become the classic it is. When Speed finally hit theaters in June 1994, no one was fully prepared for how big it would become. The studio hoped it would do well, but expectations were modest. After all, it was about a bus that couldn't slow down, a concept some people thought was too odd or too simple. Yet from the very first screenings, it was clear that Speed was not just another action film. It was an adrenaline rush, a crowd pleaser, and a box office sensation. Audiences who walked into the theater found themselves on the edge of their seats from start to finish. The idea of a bus rigged with a bomb turned out to be brilliant. Every time the bus swerved through traffic, hit a bump, or nearly slowed down, viewers gasped and held their breath. The tension never let up, and people couldn't look away. Some even said they felt like they were on the bus with the characters, experiencing the fear and urgency firsthand. But what surprised people most was how much heart the movie had. Speed wasn't just explosions, crashes, and loud noises. It had characters the audience cared about. Jack Traven, played by Keanu Reeves, wasn't a cocky action hero. He was calm, steady, and believable. Annie Porter, played by Sandra Bullock, wasn't a helpless passenger. She was smart, funny, and brave. Together, they gave the story warmth, humor, and humanity. Viewers left the theater talking not only about the action, but also about how much they loved Jack and Annie as a pair. Critics, who are often tough on action films, were also impressed. Many praised Jan de Bont's direction, noting how he kept the pace tight and the tension high without losing the human element. Reviewers highlighted Keanu's performance as a breakthrough moment in his career. They noted how his calm heroism gave the movie a different feel compared to the loud, macho action stars of the time. Sandra's performance received even more attention. Critics called her the breakout star of the year, praising her ability to mix humor, charm, and courage into one unforgettable character. The chemistry between Keanu and Sandra was one of the most talked about elements of the film. Reviewers pointed out that their relationship felt natural, not forced. Unlike many action films where romance feels tacked on, the bond between Jack and Annie grew organically out of the story. By the time they kissed at the end, audiences weren't rolling their eyes, they were cheering. Word of mouth spread quickly. People told their friends, "You have to see this movie." Theaters filled up, and box office numbers soared. Speed cost around $30 million to make, but it earned more than $350 million worldwide. It became one of the highest-grossing films of 1994 and turned into an instant classic. The success changed everything for its two stars. Keanu Reeves went from being known as the Bill and Ted guy to a serious action hero. Suddenly, Hollywood saw him as someone who could carry big-budget films. This role paved the way for future successes like The Matrix. For Sandra Bullock, the change was even more dramatic. Practically overnight, she became America's sweetheart. Casting directors lined up to offer her leading roles, and she quickly rose to become one of the top actresses of the decade. Fans were also quick to show their love. People wrote letters praising the film. Fan magazines featured Sandra and Keanu on their covers, and TV talk shows invited them for interviews. Viewers couldn't get enough of their playful banter and clear affection for one another, even off-screen. Some even started rumors, hoping the two were secretly dating. While that wasn't true, the idea added to the excitement and the legend of their pairing. The success of Speed also influenced the action movie genre as a whole. Studios realized that audiences wanted more than just car chases and explosions. They wanted characters they could connect with. The film proved that chemistry between actors could make or break a story. Without Keanu and Sandra, Speed might have been forgotten. With them, it became unforgettable. In the end, the release of Speed was more than just a box office victory. It was the beginning of a legacy. It gave Hollywood two new stars, created one of the most beloved on-screen duos of all time, and showed that even a simple story could become legendary when told with heart. When Speed exploded at the box office in 1994, it didn't just make money. It left behind a legacy that still shapes Hollywood today. The film proved that action movies could be more than car chases, explosions, and gunfights. They could also have heart, humor, and characters who felt real. And at the center of that lesson were Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Their on-screen chemistry set a standard that many other films tried, and often failed, to copy. Before Speed, most action movies of the late 80s and early 90s followed a familiar formula. The hero was usually a tough, larger-than-life man who relied on muscles, weapons, and one-liners to save the day. Female characters were often secondary, love interests, or people waiting to be rescued. Speed flipped that idea on its head. Yes, it had action and thrills, but it also gave both leads equal importance. Jack wasn't just a macho cop, and Annie wasn't just a damsel in distress. They worked together as a team, and that partnership is what audiences loved most. Keanu Reeves showed Hollywood that an action star didn't need to be loud or over the top. His Jack Traven was calm, steady, and believable. He wasn't trying to show off. He was simply doing his job, staying brave under pressure, and quietly protecting others. This kind of hero was refreshing and opened the door for more relatable action characters in the future. You can see traces of Jack in later Keanu roles like Neo in The Matrix and even John Wick. Quiet men who carry deep strength without needing to shout about it. Sandra Bullock's performance was just as important. Annie Porter became a symbol of a new kind of action heroine. She wasn't trained, she wasn't perfect, and she didn't have all the answers. But she was brave, smart, and determined. She showed fear, but she also showed humor, courage, and quick thinking. This balance made her incredibly relatable to audiences. Sandra's Annie wasn't a superhero. She was an ordinary person rising to an extraordinary challenge. That idea inspired other films to create female characters who were more than just sidekicks. The chemistry between Keanu and Sandra proved how powerful a genuine connection could be. Many studios after Speed tried to replicate that magic by pairing actors together and hoping sparks would fly. Sometimes it worked, but often it didn't, because chemistry can't be forced. What Keanu and Sandra had was unique, a mix of trust, admiration, and maybe even their secret crushes, which added an extra spark that audiences could feel. The success of Speed also influenced casting decisions in other movies. Studios began to realize that sometimes taking a risk on less obvious choices could lead to bigger rewards. Keanu wasn't the typical action star, and Sandra wasn't the obvious choice for a lead. But together, they became unforgettable. Their success encouraged Hollywood to look beyond the usual big names and give chances to actors who brought something fresh. Even beyond Speed, the legacy of their chemistry lived on. When Keanu and Sandra reunited more than a decade later in The Lake House, 2006, fans were thrilled. Although the movie was slower and more romantic, people watched it mainly to see the two stars together again. Their connection hadn't faded, and audiences were reminded of the magic they created in Speed. It proved that their bond wasn't limited to one genre or one film. It was something timeless. Today, many fans and critics still call Jack and Annie one of the best on-screen couples in movie history. They may not have ended up together in real life, but their pairing continues to inspire discussions, fan edits, and tributes online. Younger generations discovering Speed for the first time are surprised at how fresh and exciting the film feels, even after nearly 30 years. That lasting quality is the true mark of legacy. Hollywood has produced countless action films since 1994, but very few have matched the balance of thrills and heart that Speed delivered. Its influence can be seen in films that try to mix high-stakes action with relatable characters, but the gold standard remains Keanu and Sandra's partnership. They showed that explosions grab attention, but chemistry wins hearts. In the end, the legacy of Speed isn't just about a bus that couldn't slow down. It's about two actors who turned a simple action plot into something unforgettable. Their performances changed their careers, influenced Hollywood, and gave audiences one of the most beloved pairings in cinema history. Almost 3 decades have passed since Speed raced into theaters, yet fans still talk about Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock as if the movie was released yesterday. Their on-screen partnership continues to capture hearts, and discussions about their chemistry appear regularly on social media, fan forums, and entertainment shows. The question is, why? Why does this pairing still matter after so many years and after so many other action films have come and gone? The answer lies in the unique magic Keanu and Sandra created together. Audiences sensed something real between them. It wasn't just acting. It was the way they looked at each other, the comfort in their body language, and the genuine warmth in their smiles. That authenticity is rare in Hollywood, where many on-screen romances can feel forced or artificial. With Jack and Annie, people believed it. They believed two strangers could find trust, respect, and even the beginnings of love while trapped in an extraordinary situation. Part of what keeps the story alive is the later revelation that both actors secretly had crushes on each other during filming. When Sandra admitted years later that she had liked Keanu, fans were delighted. When Keanu revealed that he had also liked Sandra, the story became even more legendary. Suddenly, all those lingering glances and shy smiles in the film made perfect sense. Audiences realized they hadn't been imagining the spark. It had been real all along, even if unspoken. This unfulfilled romance has fueled decades of what-if conversations. Fans often wonder what might have happened if one of them had confessed back in 1994. Would they have become a Hollywood power couple? Would their careers have changed? Or would it have risked their friendship? The fact that the question remains unanswered only adds to the charm. Sometimes, the most powerful love stories are the ones that never happened. Another reason their chemistry endures is their continued friendship. Unlike many co-stars who drift apart after filming, Keanu and Sandra have always spoken warmly about each other. In interviews, they praise each other's talent, kindness, and humor. Sandra once said that Keanu is one of the most generous people I've ever met. Keanu, in turn, described Sandra as someone who lights up every room she walks into. That mutual admiration reinforces the idea that their connection was genuine, not just a temporary product of a movie set. Their reunion in the Lake House, 2006, only strengthened this legacy. Even though the movie itself wasn't as successful as Speed, audiences loved seeing them together again. Their chemistry hadn't faded. In fact, it had matured. Watching them, fans were reminded of why they fell in love with Jack and Annie years earlier. The internet has also kept their story alive. Clips of their interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and fan-made tributes circulate constantly. Younger fans who weren't even alive when Speed was released discover the movie online and are shocked by how engaging it still feels. They often comment that the chemistry between Keanu and Sandra feels stronger than many modern on-screen romances. In a world of fast-moving trends, the fact that Speed and its stars remain relevant is proof of its timeless appeal. But perhaps the biggest reason people still talk about their chemistry is nostalgia. For many, Speed wasn't just a movie, it was an experience. It was the thrill of sitting in a theater, gripping the armrest as the bus raced down the highway. It was the joy of discovering two actors who felt fresh, real, and exciting. Rewatching the movie brings those feelings back, and seeing Keanu and Sandra together is like visiting old friends. Today, when fans discuss the greatest on-screen couples, Jack and Annie are almost always mentioned. They may not have ended up together in real life, but that doesn't matter. Their story reminds us that sometimes, the most powerful connections aren't about lasting romances. They're about moments of trust, laughter, and shared courage in the face of danger. The legacy of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's chemistry in Speed is simple but profound. It showed the world that action movies can have heart, and that true connection shines brighter than any explosion. That's why, nearly 30 years later, people still talk about it, dream about it, and hope, even now, that maybe one day they'll see Keanu and Sandra share the screen again.